The animals don't have that responsibility. The plants don't. But humans do. That is, to understand how to get out of the entanglement of birth, death, old age, and disease. So, the fundamental thing that we have to learn is, who is the proprietor? In every society, every society is organized on some principle of proprietorship. So we live in a capitalist society, so the main principle of proprietorship in a capitalist society is individual ownership. In a monarchy, the ownership is mainly in the hands of the king and the nobles and his family members and so forth. Then in a communistic system, no individual is the owner, it's the community that's the owner, or the commune. In a socialistic system, it's the government that's the owner, the primary owner. And in an anarchist system, nobody's the owner. So we see in every organized society, and then of course there's a dictatorship, that's the dictator and his family members and military industrial complex that cooperate with him. They're the owners. So in every society, there is some concept of ownership at the basis of that society. If that concept is not true, then the people are not happy in that society. And every one of the concepts of proprietorship that I named just now are all wrong. The only concept of proprietorship that is true is that Krishna, or God, is the proprietor. How do we know that? Well, everything that exists is made of God's energy. For example, Bhumir apo nalu vayukam manu buddhirevacha hankara ityame bina pakritirastada. Krishna says, my inferior spiritual energy, or apara prakriti, is made up of earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, false ego. So, and then he says, apariyam itastvanyam prakriti vidime param jiva bhuta mahabaho yaryadam dayate jagat. And my superior spiritual energy is constituted of all living entities. So Krishna expands the material world, that's his inferior spiritual energy, and he also expands all the jivas, or individuals like us. We are part of his superior spiritual energy. Both energies are spiritual, matter and spirit. And also, Krishna expands the entire spiritual world and all the Narayana expansions, and there are billions of them in the spiritual world. And then, for the material world, he expands as the Vishnu expansions, and there are billions of them. And there are three main Vishnu expansions. There's Mahavishnu, Garbhodakshay Vishnu, Shirodakshay Vishnu. And the third expansion, Shirodakshay Vishnu, is present in every atom of the universe and in the heart of every living entity. And this way, everything is being maintained precisely by Krishna, by his expansions. So, everything actually belongs to Krishna. Our body, which is made of earth, water, fire, air, ether, and so forth. Our soul, which is emanating from Krishna. Mamayavam sa jivaloka jivabhuta sanatana. So our soul is eternal, is emanated from Krishna. We are an eternal, minute individual. Krishna is an eternal, infinite, or great individual. No one can be equal to or greater than him. So here we see that everything actually belongs to Krishna. We belong to Krishna. Our body belongs to Krishna. It's made of his energy. Our soul belongs to Krishna. It comes from him. And if we identify ourselves as the eternal servant of Krishna, and we follow the Vedic wisdom, we become free of the entanglement of the material world, free of birth, death, old age, and disease. If we ignore that and interpose ourselves or pretend that we are the proprietor, then we get entangled in the mesh of action and reaction. So if you take advantage of another person's property, you're a criminal. So if we don't recognize the proprietorship of Krishna, we act as if we are the proprietor, we get caught in a hopeless, let's say, entanglement of action and reaction, and we stay perpetually in a cycle of birth and death. So then here it says, although everything is emanating from Krishna, he is the maintainer of everything, and everything eventually will go back to him. But he's not responsible for the choices we make. And because we're endowed with limited free will. Now, limited free will is a great benediction, but it can be also a curse. Because with free will, we make decisions. If we make the wrong decisions due to being in a state of ignorance or illusion, then we suffer. If we make the right decisions, we don't suffer. And we're actually protected by the Lord. So all intelligence comes from Krishna. Sarva Shichaham Hridisanivisto Matak Smritir Jnanam Apahanam Cha. Krishna says, I'm present in the heart of every living entity, and from me comes knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. So, if we recognize the proprietor of Krishna and try and use everything in his service, then Krishna gives us more and more intelligence to become more and more expert. And actually, an expert devotee knows how to use everything in the service of the Lord. People who are not so expert, they know how to use some things, but not everything. And people who are not cognizant of their relationship with Krishna don't know how to use anything correctly. And therefore, they become more and more entangled in a hopeless situation of birth and death. So, the Lord, being full in himself, has no attraction for so-called heavenly happiness. The heavenly demigods are only his engaged servants. The proprietor never desires the low-grade happiness such as the workers may desire. He is aloof from the material actions and reactions. For example, the rains are not responsible for different types of vegetation that appear on the earth, although without such rains, there is no possibility of vegetative growth. Yeah, vegetation grows because there are seeds and there is earth with minerals in it, but you still need the water to wet the seeds so they sprout, and then the seeds absorb the minerals through the water solutions that are in the earth. Although the water is not the direct cause of the growth of the plant, it is, however, an important factor. The growth of the plant depends on the live entity in the plant, in the seed, that triggers the growth. So therefore, there is a principle called entropy. It's a scientific principle. And the scientific principle, the second law of thermodynamics, says that in any system, the entropy will increase. Entropy means the amount of disorder. So, except in a biological system. In a biological system, the entropy decreases, meaning that there's more and more order. So, you take a little seed and you plant it, and it grows. In fact, I saw this summer, one seed grew to be, a huge plant. And we see that with trees also. The seed of a tree is not very big, but the tree itself becomes gigantic. A certain, like the fir trees, the pine trees, and so forth, cottonwood trees, and the redwood trees, they grow to be gigantic trees from small seeds. So that is what you would call a violation of the law of entropy. Well, because the law of entropy, as the scientists understand it, is flawed. It doesn't apply to biological systems. But they say that it's a law that regulates all of nature. It's not actually true. Entropy is the measure of disorder, and the law says that in any system there will always be a movement from order to disorder. However, there is no such thing as disorder in the universe, because Krishna is present in every atom as Paramatma. What appears to be disorder to us is actually a cycle. Just like you have the carbon cycle, you have the nitrogen cycle. These are things that have been prearranged by Krishna. Just like if you buy let's say you buy a new car, everything has been prearranged by the manufacturer of the car. You put the key in, and you turn in a certain way, and the engine starts. You put your foot on the brake, the car stops. You put your foot on the accelerator, it goes forward or backwards, depending on what gear you're in. So that whole arrangement is made by the manufacturer. We can use it without necessarily understanding exactly how it works, but the arrangement is already there. In the same way, all these cycles in nature, like right now, there is a 5,000-mile massive river coming to the Seattle area, to the whole west coast of the United States. It's a river starting 5,000 miles. It's a river in the sky. And for the next couple of days, it's going to be a deluge here. The 15 inches of rain are going to fall in Seattle in the next 4 or 5 days. So how is such a massive amount of water being carried? In other words, the water coming here through the sky is bigger than the Mississippi River. Now, a normal cloud in the sky has 1 million pounds of water in it. But how is it that it's not crushing? You know, if 1 million pounds fell on this building, it would be crushed. Even though this is a steel building and retrofitted for earthquakes, but 1 million pounds would crush it, right? So how come, especially 1 million pounds falling from, 500 feet or 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet in the air coming down, it would crush this building. But how come that doesn't happen? Because there's engineering arrangement made so that even though the amount of water in the cloud is massive, but it's dispersed in such a way that the air can carry the individual minuscule droplets of water. They're not like raindrops yet. When they're suspended in the air, the distance between the molecules of water are such that the air can carry it. And there's a difference of air pressure due to heat and cold. So, therefore, you're going to see it's going to get colder soon, and that is what creates the buoyancy of the cloud and the dispersion of all the droplets in the cloud. Okay, so these are aerodynamic principles. Now, who made that arrangement? We can't float 1 million pounds of water in the air. No, there's no engineer that can do it. But some engineer figured out how to do it, and we're seeing it. And now there's a 5,000-mile river in the air coming here on the west coast, and it's going to dump millions and millions of pounds of rain in the next 4 or 5 days. So this is an arrangement, a aerodynamic arrangement that's been made by somebody, and we're seeing it function, although it bewilders us. And this is called in Sanskrit Achintya Shakti. Achintya Shakti means mystic power. Whenever you try and analyze something in nature back to its origin, you find mystical power that we can't understand. It baffles us. It's confusing. Therefore, scientists don't try and talk about the origin of things. They just try and talk about the middle, where you see macroscopic things and acting under the laws of gravity and Newton's laws of motion. So those things they can understand, and there's a good level of predictability in their theories. But when you go back to the origin, where, how that cloud was formed, who made the arrangement, the aerodynamic arrangement, to push such a massive amount of weight through for thousands of miles, and then to disperse it in the form of rain or snow, no one can answer that question. All we can do is just watch it. Just like Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Irma, Hurricane this one, that one. All you can do is watch it. You can't do anything to stop it, because the massive power that's manifested is bewildering. Right? So, that is called Achintya Shakti, and one must admit that there is a greater engineer, there's a greater aerodynamic, let's say, engineer who's made this arrangement. And then if you look at other things in nature, you'll see there are incredible cycles, like the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the changing of the seasons, the rotation of the earth on its axis, the bending of the tilting of the axis of the earth from summer to winter and then back. All these things are beyond our understanding, and it's just a demonstration of mystical power, or Achintya Shakti. So Krishna is arranging all these things, but due to false ego and due to enviousness, most scientists and most observers refuse to acknowledge that. That is a sign of ignorance. So the Vedic literatures say, Nimitta matram evaso srijyanam sarga karmani. In the material creations, the Lord is the only supreme cause. The immediate cause is material nature, by which the cosmic manifestation is made visible. So this idea of a remote cause and an immediate cause, this is another thing that bewilders people. Like, for example, up until the mid-19th century, people believed in spontaneous generation. What does that mean? Beginning with the Greeks, they believed that living things come out spontaneously, without understanding any origin of it. They just appear. For example, in the Far East, at a certain time of the year, baby scorpions crawl out of the paddy fields, the rice fields. So, previously people thought the rice fields produced the baby scorpions. Is that a fact? No. They did not see the mother scorpion lay the eggs in the rice fields. All they see is the baby scorpions coming out in a certain time of the year. In the same way, previously, people thought that different types of bugs and worms are spontaneously generated. Why? Because they didn't have microscopes until the mid-19th century. So they didn't understand the existence of microscopic seeds, germs, funguses, and yeasts. They didn't understand it. They thought things just generate spontaneously. Then with the microscope, in the mid-19th century, 1850s, they began to see that there's a whole world. I mean, the microscope existed from the 17th century. And people were noticing that there's a whole minuscule world or microscopic world. But then their observations became sharper and sharper. And then you have a person named Louis Pasteur, who is able to recognize that life comes from life. Life is not generated from dead matter. Spontaneous generation implied that living things are generated by some mechanism from dead matter. But Pasteur proved that life comes from life. It doesn't come from, there's no amount of material combination that can create life. How did he do that? Well, he was faced with a problem in France. France is famous for making wine. And oftentimes, people who were making wine ended up with vinegar instead of wine. And they couldn't understand why. And sometimes people were making vinegar, they ended up with wine instead of vinegar. So they couldn't figure out why this was happening. Until Pasteur came, and he used his microscope, and he saw that wine is produced by yeast. Vinegar is produced by bacteria. And they were amazed. And how did he prove that? He challenged them to give him, let's say, 100 samples. And he would say whether it would become wine or vinegar. And there were some expert wine tasters who could also predict with good predictability if something was in the process of fermentation, whether it would become wine or vinegar. So Pasteur did it 100% correct, better than even the experts who use taste and touch and visual senses to understand, because Pasteur had a microscope, and he was able to discern between yeast and bacteria. And then he put science behind the winemakers so that they could end up with perfect wine every time. Whereas before, it was a hit or miss deal, and then they would lose money. So Pasteur's scientific research became the backbone of the entire French wine industry, and it's continuing today. Now, Pasteur proved that life comes from life. It doesn't come from dead matter. How did he do that? He used a swan neck flask. And a swan neck flask, in other words, you have like a bottle, but the glass blowers make a tube-like neck that goes up and then comes down and then goes up again and then out, right? So that any type of air that comes into the tube, if it carries anything with it, that will get caught in the sloping part of that tube it comes out from the flask, and only a gaseous mist can go into the flask. So what did Pasteur do? He made a nutrient broth in which you can culture bacteria or yeast, and he boiled it, and then all the mist, the vapor came out, and it was basically sterilized. Then he had his glass blower. He closed the swan neck tube coming out of the flask so that no air could get in. And he kept it like that. And nothing happened because it had become sterilized. There was no living entities in the broth. And for years, he watched it for several years. Nothing happened. Then he broke the glass tip, and he let again nothing happened because of the swan neck. No particles could get into the broth. Then he exposed the broth to the air, and then it grew bacteria again, and all kinds of things started growing in it. So he proved that life comes from life. It doesn't come from dead matter. In other words, you can make any combination you want of hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. But if it's a sterile environment with no air able to get to it, it won't grow anything. The same thing, open to the air, will sprout all kinds of bacteria, yeasts, and funguses over a period of time. Okay, so it's not because there's no air, it's because there are all kinds of bacteria, spores, and other things floating in the air. And those things are living things. So they reproduce when they come into a environment that has the right temperature and the right nutrient base, and they will grow prolifically. Okay, so here Krishna has made this arrangement, and the arrangement is life always comes from life. It does not come from dead chemicals, although the scientists have been trying for the last 300 years to prove that dead matter can produce life by some fortuitous combination of hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen. But it's not a fact. Just like, for example, you cannot sprout a plant unless there's a seed, a live seed in the ground. You cannot have, like, say, like for example, in the Mojave Desert, once every 7 or 10 years, there's a deluge. There's a lot of rain. And as soon as the rain falls, shrimps appear in the desert. But it only happens whenever there's a big rainfall, and that is oftentimes every 5 or 10 years. Right? Now, how come the shrimps millions of shrimps appear in a matter of a week or two after the rain, and then when the normal desert weather comes back, everything disappears? Where did all the shrimps come from? Well, the life cycle of these type of shrimps are you can look this up on the internet if you want. They have pictures of those shrimps. They have descriptions of what happens. Their life cycle is rather short, and they lay eggs, and the eggs are laid in the mud, and then when this desert weather comes back again, the mud becomes like a solid cake, and all the water evaporates, and those eggs remain dormant until there's another rain. When the rain can be 5 years later or 10 years later. As soon as the rain comes, the eggs hatch and the shrimps come out. And the shrimps are like this size. They have pincers and everything. And then they reproduce, and they lay their eggs, thousands of eggs, and then the sun evaporates all the water, and the eggs are left in that caked mud, which becomes very hard and protects them. And then the rain will come again 5 years later, and all of a sudden there's millions of shrimp. See? So who made this arrangement? This is a very complicated arrangement. So therefore it says, in the material creations, the Lord is only the supreme cause. The immediate cause is nature. So the placing a living entity in a seed or in in a spore or whatever, that is a special arrangement made only by God. For example, there's an egg, a chicken egg. Now, scientists know exactly what's in the chicken egg. They know all the chemicals in it, but they can't reproduce one. The chicken can, but the scientists can't in the laboratory. Right? Now, that proves that there's something mysterious. Now, another thing. For example, in the human body, we produce blood. Scientists have never been able to produce blood up until today. In fact, if any one of you can figure out how to make blood, you would be the richest person in the world, much richer than Bezos or Bill Gates or Warren Buffett or anybody. No one has ever figured out how to do it. But yet, we make it with our own body. That's called Achintya Shakti. There's some mysterious, mystical power that we have by which we can make blood fusion. And fusion is a very complicated process that is not understood by the scientists. Or a cow. A cow can eat grass and produce tremendous quantity of milk. Now, if a human being or a woman eats grass, she will not be able to produce milk. But the cow can do it. So there's mystical power in the cow also. Any time you try and go to the origin of something in this world, you end up with mystical power that baffles you. And it baffles the scientists. Therefore, they avoid origins. And they just talk about, like for example, when they talk about the Big Bang and how the first amoeba came about. It sounds like it sounds like a fairy tale. There's no science behind, or no rationale behind it. They talk about the Big Bang. If I made a Big Bang in your kitchen, would it create something or destroy something? So obviously it would destroy things. So all these theories are ridiculous. However, what's happening in nature baffles people because it's a higher science, and there's mystical potency in it. Like, for example, if you were to do an experiment to make H2O, a water molecule, so you would have to go to a laboratory supply company and order a canister of hydrogen, a canister of oxygen. You would have to have a pressurized chamber. There's a lot of plumbing involved in that. And you would have to be able to heat up that chamber also. There's more plumbing, more electrical work, and so forth, in order to create the pressure and the heat so that the hydrogen and oxygen can combine to make water. And it would cost you a lot of money, and you would make a small quantity of water, maybe. Now the question is, where did all the hydrogen and oxygen come from for the ocean? The Pacific Ocean, it goes from here all the way to China. It could cost you at least $50 for a small canister of hydrogen, and another $50 for a small canister of oxygen. Where did all that hydrogen and oxygen come? And where was that pressurized chamber? And where was all the heat necessary to make an ocean of water? Again, we encounter what's called mystical power. We can't understand how it happened. We see it with our own eyes. We might be able to reproduce it on a very small level, but to reproduce it at the level that we're experiencing, such as the Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, it's beyond our imagination. That's why real scientists, for example, a real scientist is Isaac Newton. He's right up there with Einstein, and maybe even greater than Einstein. Now, Isaac Newton said, "We have only examined a few grains of sand in the ocean of knowledge." Now, that's a real scientist. He's admitting, with all humility, that they haven't even scratched the surface of science in the universe, or even on this earth. So that can only be said by a person who's actually humbled by what they have seen. And Newton definitely was humbled in all his scientific research, because he kept running into mystical power that he couldn't understand or explain. Okay, so the created beings are of many varieties, such as the demigods, human beings, and the lower animals, and all of them are subject to the reactions of their past good or bad activities, and the regulations of the modes of nature, sattva, rajas, and tamas. But the living entity is never responsible for the But Krishna is never responsible for the past and present activities of the living entities. In other words, for example, the state of Washington helps you to get a license to drive. You have to take a written test. You have to do a practical test, driving test with a supervisor. Now, once you get your license, you decide where you want to go. You decide how you're going to drive. Now, if you speed, the state of Washington is not responsible for your speeding. In other words, breaking the rules of the route. Why? They gave you a license because you proved to them that you knew or you know what the rules of driving are in the state of Washington. And they also made you pass a practical test with a supervisor or with an observer. But if you go speeding, if you get into accidents, the state of Washington is not responsible. Because those are dependent on decisions that you made. In the same way, Krishna gives us this amazing body, human body, with human intelligence, with amazing instruments of knowledge-gathering senses, and so forth, and limited free will. If we misuse it, and we make major mistakes, Krishna is not responsible. We're responsible. And we're held responsible by the laws of karma. So Krishna is never responsible, although he has set up the whole arrangement. And he has given all facilities. Just like the state of Washington has given all facilities. They have roads, highways, and they have red lights, and they have white lines, and they've done everything to facilitate our driving. But if we break the rules, we're responsible. In the Vedanta Sutra, it is confirmed, Vaisamya Naragrinye na Sapek Satvat. Hare Krishna, Shri Radha Nilamadava Ki Jai, Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna. The Lord is never partial to any living entity. The living entity is responsible for his own acts. The Lord only gives him facilities through the agency of material nature, the external energy. Anyone who is fully conversant with all the intricacies of the law of karma, or fruit of activities, does not become affected by the results of his activities. Now, is there any course, 101, the law of karma, in the universities in the United States? No. Just like there's no course, Love 101, Peace 101, Harmony 101, right? Things that are absolutely essential for living entities, for human beings to live peacefully and happily in this world. There's no knowledge, no course in that. Yeah, there's course in C++ and JavaScript and this and that, but not in the laws of karma. But here it's saying, a person who understands, anyone who is fully conversant with all the intricacies of this law of karma, or fruit of activities, does not become affected by the results of his activities. In other words, the person who understands this transcendental nature of the Lord is an experienced person in Krishna consciousness, and thus he is never subjected to the laws of karma. Now, isn't this the knowledge that we should be teaching our kids? Isn't this the knowledge that we should know ourselves? But it's not given anywhere, except in Bhagavad Gita, except in the Vedic tradition. But people are not interested in the Vedic tradition. People are not interested in Bhagavad Gita. They're interested in JavaScript and all these other things, and they get entangled, and they suffer, and they become miserable, and they have depression, and they end up taking psychotropic drugs to deal with the depression. See? Why is that? Because all modern education is ignorance. Amanitvam, madam itvam, ahimsa santir arjavam. This Bhagavad Gita 13th chapter, 8th to 12th verse, explains the 20 principles of real knowledge. And it says, anything besides this is considered ignorance. So, if you go through that list, chapter 13, verses 8 to 12, Amanitman, the first is humility. Adamitman, pridelessness. Ahimsa, non-violence. Shantir, tolerance. Arjamam, truthfulness. Acharya Pasamam, accepting a bona fide spiritual master. Socham, cleanliness, internally and externally. Staryam, steadfastness, determination to start something and finish it. Especially start the search for the truth and finish it. And then Staryam, Atma Vinigraha, self-control. Indriyarte Savairagyam, the perception of the evil of Indriyarte Savairagyam, Anahankara Evacha, the perception of the evil of sense gratification. And then Anahankara, freedom from false ego. Janma Mityu Jarabhyadi Dukkadosana Darshanam. The understanding the pernicious nature of birth, death, old age, and disease. In other words, if we understand that we are an eternal soul, and our soul is temporarily covered by this matter, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, then we understand that birth, death, old age, and disease is only pertinent to the body. It's not pertinent to the soul. The soul is eternal. Therefore, with that knowledge, we reduce the needs of the body to a minimum and gain tremendous amount of time for spiritual quest, for the philosophical search of the truth as the main goal in our life. So, and then there are many other points. There's 20 points of knowledge. Anything besides these 20 points is considered ignorance. So an experienced person will be trained and will understand how the intricate laws of karma work, and therefore such a person can avoid 99% of the problems in life. That 1% is for genuine mistakes, but the 99% is avoidance with knowledge of the pitfalls of the laws of karma. Laws of karma are very serious. Like, for example, ignorance is not an excuse. If your child puts their hand in fire, the fire doesn't say, oh, this is a child, I'll excuse the child, I won't burn it. No. The laws of nature are blind. Therefore, if we knowingly or unknowingly violate the laws of karma, well, knowingly, we know we're going to suffer. But unknowingly, if we, due to ignorance, if we violate the laws of karma, we still get burned. Just like the innocent child, if the child puts a hand in the fire, it gets burned. So therefore, ignorance is not an excuse. We need to understand how the laws of karma are working. Like, for example, if a person eats meat, according to the Manu Samhita, the karma for eating, especially cow meat, is that we will take birth as many times as there are hairs on the body of the cow and be slaughtered in the same way the cow is slaughtered. In other words, eating cow meat, the karmic reaction for that is so severe that it's unimaginable. How many hairs are there on the body of the cow? Hundreds and thousands. That means we will be slaughtered hundreds and thousands of times, like the cow is slaughtered. And then the laws of karma are inexorable. They're unending. Like, for example, just driving here to the temple, we kill hundreds and thousands of living entities. Now, we don't do it willfully. We do it unconsciously. We don't even realize we're doing it. But if we drive from one place to another simply for our selfish indulgence, then we get the whole karma for killing so many living entities. Of course, you're not killing a cow, you're living lower order living entities, but still there's killing involved. And therefore, we are responsible, whether we know it or not. But if we're driving, let's say you're driving to come to the temple to engage in service for the Lord, then Krishna says, Sarva dharmam parityaja mam ekam saranam braja aham tvam sarva papebhyo moksisyami ma suchaha. 18th chapter, 66th verse, he says that, O Arjuna, Sarva dharmam parityaja, give up all your fabricated dharmas, all your fabricated ideas of what religion is or isn't, and surrender uniquely unto me. Ma ekam saranam braja. Therefore I promise you, Satyam te, if you do this, I will protect you from all sinful reactions incurred knowingly or unknowingly. And therefore, you should not have any reason now to hesitate, to doubt, or to fear. So this is Krishna's ultimate instruction in Bhagavad Gita. In other words, he's going to give us 100% dispensation for any sins we have committed if we surrender completely to him, and from that point on engage wholeheartedly in his service. No one else can give that benediction. Even Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma cannot do that. In other words, free us completely from our previous karma and protect us as we're engaging in devotional service from any unconscious violations of the laws of karma that we may perform, like driving a car and killing so many living entities. So this is the unique experience that a devotee has. In fact, this is why I joined Krishna consciousness, when I realized this point, that we are unconsciously going deeper and deeper into the intricate reactions of the laws of karma by remaining in the blissful state of ignorance. Sometimes people say ignorance is bliss. It's not bliss. It is ultimate misery. But when we become, just like a person, let's say you're a child, becomes 16, and you buy them a beautiful new BMW. Well, BMWs, they're made to go 150 miles an hour. They're tremendous cars. But is a young kid, 16 or 17 years old, responsible enough to drive such a powerful car? Oftentimes, if you can ask, well, you'll find out anyway. If you give your child a car like that, you'll find out that you're paying a really high insurance premium. Why? Because insurance companies know that kids between 16 and 20 have more accidents than anybody else, right? And that's why. And then if such an expensive car, so they will zap you with a very high premium payments. So a child like that does not really understand the dangers incurred in driving, and especially a very powerful car like that. In fact, I know someone who gave their son a brand new BMW when he was 16. He was dead before he was 17. He killed himself speeding. So, but let's say you have a bad accident. A 16-year-old has a bad accident and they survive, and of course they lose their license for some time if it was their fault, etc. The next time they drive, they'll be very, very careful because they have experience of how dangerous it is when one is not fully aware of the responsibility to drive a car. So, but the point is, we're driving this car called the body, and the driver is a soul, an eternal soul, and the body is a perishable thing. Therefore, we have to be trained in understanding the intricacies of the laws of karma. Otherwise, we could make terrible mistakes in this life and suffer. Just like there was an article about a man visiting the United States for the first time from Ireland. He was a young guy, maybe 25, 26 years old. And he was excited, and he landed in New York City, and he ended up walking down Broadway and Fifth Avenue, and he felt like he was on top of the world. He came from some country town in Ireland, and now he's in New York City on Broadway with all the lights and all the limousines and all the people, and he was very excited. And he happens to meet a girl, a very pretty girl, and they hit it off really well, and they end up in his apartment. And then the next morning he wakes up, the girl's not there, but she's written on the wall, "Welcome to the world of AIDS." And he's not quite sure what that means, but 6 months later he was diagnosed with AIDS. So he didn't come to the United States to catch AIDS. He came to have a good time. But he didn't realize many things about walking down the street and meeting someone. So this is the nature of the material world. Ignorance is not an excuse. One needs culture. One needs education, but real education, not the fake education of learning, history of the United States or learning about archaeology. Of course, maybe you can make a living with that, but that doesn't help you live. There's a difference between making a living and actually live successfully. So, therefore, unless we learn Bhagavad Gita, we are like a sleepwalker on the edge of a cliff. A sleepwalker is someone gets out of bed and starts walking like a zombie, even though they're still sleeping, and they don't realize, that they're on the edge of a cliff and they can fall over at any moment. So that is the nature of children and adults who have never been trained in Vedic knowledge. They will be, and who never develop the values of the Vedic culture. They'll be sleepwalking on the edge of a cliff, and any false move, they die. So, therefore, Krishna says, in other words, the person who understands this transcendental nature of the Lord is an experienced person in Krishna consciousness, and thus he or she is never subjected to the laws of karma. One who does not know the transcendental nature of the Lord and who thinks that the activities of the Lord are aimed at fruitive results. In other words, I'll come to the temple, I'll get some archana, and my business will do better. Or I have a health problem, I'll come to the temple, have archana, and my disease will go away. That's called a fruitive activity. Simply engaging in pseudo-religious activities for material benefit. That is not the purpose of spiritual life. So, one who does not know the transcendental nature of the Lord and who thinks that the activities of the Lord are aimed at fruitive results, or material results, as are the activities of the ordinary living entities, certainly becomes entangled himself in fruitive reactions. But one who knows the supreme truth is a liberated soul fixed in Krishna consciousness. So, simply doing pujas for material benefit is actually just as bad as sleepwalking on the edge of a cliff, because even if one receives the benediction of a better business, doing good on the SAT test, health problems going away, all of that simply engenders karma. Karma can be good or bad. Both are entangling, because to get that karma, one has to take birth again. So it doesn't solve the problem of birth, death, old age. And even good karma doesn't solve the problem of birth, death, old age, and disease. Therefore, there are three types of karma. There's karma, vikarma, and akarma. Karma means activities according to the Vedic principles but engaged in for material benefit. That keeps one entangled in the laws of material nature. But by such activities, one is promoted from a third-class prisoner to potentially a first-class prisoner, but one is still a prisoner, subject to birth, death, old age, and disease. Then there is akarma, blatantly breaking the rules and regulations of the Vedas, and then one gets overwhelmed with negative karma, life after life. One goes down in the evolutionary scale or evolutionary ladder. See, there is evolution. It's evolution of consciousness, not evolution of bodies. All the bodies are created in the beginning of creation by Krishna. All the species are created by Krishna. But within those species, the living entities are placed according to their previous karma, and they progress consciously from one species to another until they come in a regulated way, until they come to the human form, where they have a chance to break the cycle of birth and death. But if they take the human birth as an opportunity to exploit nature, to increase their sense gratification, to misuse their senses and intelligence for sense gratification, then they fall down again. And they repeat going from one species to another till they come back to the human form. So that's called the Ferris wheel syndrome. Sometimes you're on the top, sometimes you come down to the bottom. So people are just going around and around in circles in the cycle of birth and death. So therefore, this one verse, Namam karmani limpanti, name karma phalespriha, itimam yo bijananti, karma bir nasabadyate. There is no work that affects me, Krishna says, nor do I aspire for the fruits of action. One who understands this truth about me also does not become entangled in the fruitive reactions of work. So this is a verse that points toward the liberation of the living entity from the cycle of birth and death, if they can imbibe or assimilate the profound meaning of this verse. So are there any questions anyone would like to ask? No questions? Ask a question. Ask a question. How do what? With knowledge. Like, for example, let's say someone calls you up and they say that you just want a free vacation to Cancun, Mexico, right? And they ask you, how would you like to receive the tickets to the hotel, free tickets to the hotel and the airline ticket? Do you want it by snail mail? You want it by email? Or would you like to pick up these things at the airport? Well, you say, okay, I'll pick it up at the airport. They say, okay, all we need is your name, address, and a Social Security account, Social Security number. Would you give it? You might, in the excitement of winning so much, you might do it, right? People do these things, right? And then you're waiting for, you choose the date, and then they say, okay, send the date to us, when you want to go, and we'll confirm that you can pick everything up at the airport. So everything seems normal. You get the email back. It looks legitimate. And 2 months later, you go to the airport. You got your bags packed and everything. You got your credit cards, everything. And you have even some certificate that says, you're going to stay in such and such a hotel, and you have a rental car and everything. And you go to the airport, and you check in, and they look on, their records, and they say, we don't have anything for you. You say, what? What do you mean you don't have anything? There should be a ticket here for me. I said, no, we don't have, your name's not on the list. So, a chill goes down your back, right? And you're like, so you start making some phone calls. All the numbers have been canceled, right? And for the first time now, you begin to think, maybe I was ripped off. But you're still not sure. So you keep, you try and send emails to the email that you had. And then you try and call them up, and nothing works. And then you get your bank statement, and you're $10,000 in the red. Somebody pulled out $10,000 from your account, right? So the next time someone calls you up and said, ma'am, you just want a vacation to Hawaii. How do you want to get the ticket? Snail mail, email, or you want to pick it up at the airport, and you'll have your car, you'll have your hotel room, you have all meals paid. What would you say? You would hang up, right? So you have knowledge through direct experience. Say, so how do you stop this unconscious karma? You need knowledge. And that's what it's teaching here. That this one book, is teaching this type of exclusive, high-quality, life-saving knowledge. And very few people are interested in it. They say, oh, yeah, Bhagavad Gita, oh, yeah, I'm born in India, I know all about it. They don't know anything about it. They don't know one thing about it. Or if they know something, it's the wrong thing. It's a wrong understanding. You see? But yet you ask about JavaScript, you ask about C++, you ask about this thing or that thing. Oh, they'll sit down and talk to you for hours. They're experts in that. But this thing that can guarantee your happiness and your eternal salvation, they know nothing. Does that make sense? It doesn't make sense. It is crazy. This is more important than, this is teaching you how to be happy the rest of your life, how to have a fruitful life, how to, save yourself untold misery due to ignorance. But yet people are not interested. It's amazing. If you have done something, what? Yes. Okay, but these things happen in life due to misunderstandings, right? Now, the question is, what is your goal in life? Do you want to stay in the material world and have the same thing repeated over and over again? Or you want to solve the problem? So, therefore, solving the problem is like this. I'm explaining to you now very quickly, but you have the kernel of the answer. It's in the 12th chapter, 13th and 14th verse. Advaita sarvabhutanam maitra karana evacha nirmama nirhankara samadukha sukham dhiram santusta satatam yogi yatatma duta nischaya mayarpita manobuddhir yomad bhakta same priya. It says, one who is not envious, but is a kind friend to all living entities, who does not think himself or herself a proprietor, and is free from false ego, who is equal in both happiness and distress, who is tolerant, always satisfied, self-controlled, and engaged in devotional service with determination, his or her mind and intelligence fixed on me meaning Krishna. Such a devotee of mine is very dear to me. Now, in the explanation of this verse, it's extremely profound. And it's not very long either. It's rather short, but extremely profound. Listen carefully. Coming again to the point of pure devotional service, the Lord is describing the transcendental qualifications of a pure devotee in these two verses. A pure devotee is never disturbed in any circumstance, nor is he or she envious of anyone. Nor does a devotee become his enemy's enemy. He thinks, this person is acting as my enemy due to my own past misdeeds, so it is better to suffer than to protest. In the Srimad Bhagavatam 10.14.8, it is stated, Tate nukampam susamiksamano punjana evat makritam vipakam. Whenever a devotee is in distress or has fallen into difficulty, he or she thinks that it is the Lord's mercy upon him. He thinks, thanks to my past misdeeds, I should suffer far, far greater than I am suffering now. So it is by the mercy of the Supreme Lord that I am not getting all the punishment I am due. I am just getting a little by the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the devotee is always calm, quiet, and patient, despite many distressful conditions. A devotee is always kind to everyone, even to his enemy. Nirmama means that a devotee does not attach much importance to the pains and trouble pertaining to the body, because he knows perfectly well that he is not the material body. He does not identify with the body. Therefore, he is freed from the conception of false ego and is equipoised in happiness and distress. Now, this is the key. We get elated when we're happy and distressed when there's failure. That's because we're attached to the result. And when the result is negative, it's devastating. And when the result is positive, we get proud and oftentimes arrogant. But to be equiposed, to remain equal in happiness and distress, is a sign of spiritual advancement. To remain calm, even in the most distressful situation, and to accept whatever happens as the mercy of God. These are exceptional things that only people who have deep understanding of their eternal relationship with Krishna can achieve. One cannot achieve these things artificially. One needs training, and one needs proper guidance to do it. This is real education. Imagine, we get in trouble because we're attached to some outcome, and someone interposes as an obstacle to that outcome. We get angry. It can be a brother, it can be a sister, it can be a father, it can be a neighbor, it can be a co-worker, it can be a husband, it can be a wife, and we get extremely angry. And that anger destroys the relationship. You see? So, what should be our real goal in life? Our real goal in life should be to develop love for Krishna. And actually, it's very easy. It's not a difficult thing. It's much easier than getting into arguments with people and ruining relationships. Much, much easier than that. So, if we don't have a fixed goal like that, then we'll always have these problems. So, therefore, I teach people 4 principles of logic by which you will never make a mistake the rest of your life. Number 1, accept everything favorable for Krishna consciousness. Number 2, reject everything unfavorable for Krishna consciousness. Number 3, always remember Krishna. Number 4, never forget Krishna. If you accept these 4 principles of logic, you will never have a problem in life. You see, the problem is ignoring these 4 things, right? Accepting things that are not favorable for advancing in Krishna consciousness. Meat, fish, eggs, wine, and so many things. Wasting our time watching movies that are all about nonsense anyway. And being interested in politics and news. It's all bad news anyway, right? socializing with people who are not interested in spiritual life, that can only be a catastrophe. Can't lead to anything good. So you see, we have to have baseline values that are pointing always toward advancing spiritually in life. Then we can make intelligent choices. Always accept things favorable for Krishna consciousness, reject things unfavorable. And then the main thing is what's happening in the mind, because we experience life more through the mind than through the body. Right? Like, for example, someone says something insulting to you, it hurts more than if they stabbed you with a knife, right? Because you stab you with a knife, it happens once. They insult you, you can keep it in your mind the rest of your life. And every time you think of it, it hurts. You see? So, we have to know how to keep the mind pure. Just like if there's a glass and someone pours ink in it, then if you want to use that glass to drink water, if you put water in it, it's full of ink. You can't drink it. But if you keep pouring water into the glass over and over again, eventually all the ink goes out and the water in the glass is pure. So, by associating with materialistic people and materialistic education and experiences, it's like putting ink into the mind. It gets contaminated. But by pouring nectar into the ear of Bhagavad Gita and Vedic knowledge, eventually all that junk is filtered out and there's only pure, let's say, nectar in the mind. And that by that pure nectar we can always visualize Krishna and remember the Vedic knowledge, so that our power of discrimination is such that we only accept things favorable for Krishna and we reject things unfavorable. We always remember Krishna and we never forget Krishna. Then you've hit the pinnacle of human experience. You experience the spiritual world. You actually see Krishna in your heart always. And there's nothing that will disturb you. You'll be able to tolerate. Whereas now, without that, having a mind full of negative things, our tolerance is very low. In other words, if someone says something, we can blow up in a matter of a second, because we're wound so tightly by negativity that any little thing is disturbing, and we lose it. So there's a real value in regularly, or in fact it's recommended, Shinvata Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hridyantaksto Badrani Vidu Noti Suhit Sutam Nastap Prayesu Bhadresu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Utamasloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistaki Tadarajas Tamo Bhavo Kamalova Dayasche Chetaranavitam Stitvam Satve Prasidati Evam Prasana Manaso Bhagavat Bhakti Yogataha Bhagavat Tattva Vijnana Mukta Sangha Shisjayate Vidyate Hridaya Grante Shiyante Sarvachamsaya Chidyante Sarvasamsaya Shiyante Chashikaramani Drista Evat Maniswari. To hear about Krishna from Vedic literature, or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita, is itself righteous activity. And for one who hears about Krishna, Lord Krishna, who is dwelling in everyone's heart, acts as a best-wishing friend and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him. In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge. In other words, we have knowledge within ourselves because we've gone through so many births and deaths, and we were originally with Krishna in the spiritual world, but we chose to leave him. So that knowledge of Krishna is inherent in us, but it's enveloped in many, many shrouds of ignorance, right? But as that ignorance gradually melts away, the natural knowledge that's innate in us arises. And we can remember. It's just like a person who has amnesia, but if they're cured of their amnesia, they remember again who they were, how it all happened, etc. So in this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge. As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam and from the devotees, he becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord. By development of devotional service, one becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance. These are the two qualities that keep us in the material world, and because of that, we get into arguments, we have misunderstandings, we break relationships, and so forth. It is rajas and tamas, passion and ignorance, or lust and greed and ignorance. But by development of devotional service, regularly hearing and chanting, and doing practical service for Krishna in the temple, we become freed of the modes of passion and ignorance, and thus material lust and avarice or greed are diminished. When these impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his or her position of pure goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional service, and understands the science of God perfectly. Thus, Bhakti Yoga severs the hard knot of material affection and enables one to come at once to the stage of asamsayam samagram, understanding of the Supreme Absolute Truth, personality of Godhead. So, this hard knot of material affection. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute. I love my dad. I love my family. Are you saying there's something wrong with that? Well, it's like this. Let's say a person is drowning, and you're a great swimmer, and you go out, and when you get to the person, they're all in panic, and when you try and calm them down to try and hold on to them to swim back, they fight you. And in that fight, you're pushing and pulling and trying to subdue them so that they can cooperate. And then you feel as if, you got them. And then you swim back, but when you get back, you see that you took the shirt off of the person, but you forgot the person. And they drown. Right? So, in the same way, there is material affection and there's spiritual affection. Material affection is like trying to save the drowning man, but you only saved his shirt and the guy drowned. Material affection leads nowhere. It leads to misery, basically. It leads to deception. Spiritual affection is different. So, how can we differentiate the difference? Well, spiritual affection is cultivated by giving and receiving gifts, giving and receiving Krishna prasadam, giving and receiving endearing thoughts about Krishna. And even the gifts are like gifts of Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam or Ganges water or a trip to the Divya Deshans or holy places, gifts that have spiritual significance, right? Not just you get a new toaster or something like that. That's okay, maybe you need a toaster, and you appreciate the gift. And it's a token of friendship. But a real gift is something that helps you progress spiritually, right? So these are the 6 ways of showing affection, spiritual affection. Because they're gifts from one soul to another. The material gifts are gifts from one body to another. Right? Or from one false ego to another false ego. Or from one set of lusty desires to another set of lusty desires. Those are material gifts. Spiritual gifts are from the soul to another soul. They're uplifting spiritually. Right? And spiritual food, prasadam, it's been prepared with love and devotion for Krishna, offered to Krishna, and then Krishna offers it back so you can share it with people that you love, spiritually. It's not just food, right? It's not the Thanksgiving turkey. That's not food. That's sin, right? It's not. Therefore, there's a verse that says that in the third chapter of Bhagavad Gita. It says that Yasnasistastina santo muchyante sarvakilbasai bunjate te tvagam papa ye pachanti atmakarana. The devotees of our Lord are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food which is offered first for sacrifice. Others who prepare food for personal sense enjoyment verily eat only sin. So there's food and there's spiritual food. There's material gifts and there's spiritual gifts. There are material thoughts and spiritual thoughts. There's material love and spiritual love, right? Material love is actually lust. Spiritual love is genuine love. So, if the family relationship is just based on material considerations, there are always going to be arguments. There's always going to be differences of opinion. There's always going to be the tendency to break relationships with the people that you're supposed to love. Right? But if it's based on spiritual exchanges, then a family that prays together stays together. A family that offers food to Krishna with love and devotion and then sits down and accepts the prasadam with a reverent mood, that's a different thing. That's a real family, right? So when the family relationships are just material, there's always going to be trouble. And it's unfortunate. And then you realize, oh, wait a minute, what is the real family? The real family is Achyuta Gotra, Krishna's family. So if everyone can adjust themselves to being part of Krishna's family, then you have an eternal bond. If it's just a mundane family, maybe you'll be bonded, maybe not. You don't know. And bonded for what? Bonded for material success, but not for spiritual success necessarily. Or for performing pseudo-spiritual activities, pujas for material gain. So that's not real spirituality. That is a pseudo or a false spirituality. So all these things, you have to learn. Just like there's a difference between fake gold and real gold. There's a difference between a fake Rolex and a real Rolex. There's a difference between a Ford and a Tesla. I mean, there's a difference between junk bonds and real bonds. So it's up to us to be educated, to be connoisseurs, to be experts in the laws of karma, and to understand what the real destination is of a human being. And that's what we learn by regularly hearing Bhagavad Gita. Okay? So, your verse is 12th chapter, verses 13 and 14. And the purport, 12, 13, and 14. So, any other questions? Otherwise, yes?
Prabhu, you said earlier that there were 4 things that we have to do, and third was always remember Krishna, and fourth was don't forget Krishna.
Right.
So, what's the difference there between 3 and 4?
Well, you can try to always remember Krishna and still forget Krishna. But if you always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna, then you're always with Krishna. See, in other words, you say, oh, I've been remembering Krishna all morning. I need a break. Let me, relax a little bit in the afternoon. Well, then you're breaking the 4th rule. Never forget Krishna. See? The idea of relaxation or vacation, just like, the word vacate. Vacate has different meanings. It has a legal meaning, You vacate the sentence, right? Or you vacate the debt, right? So vacate means you're leaving, but we never vacate. There's no vacation in spiritual life. But spiritual life is the vacation. It's nectar, right? So why would one want to leave the nectar? So therefore, always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. Yeah. Haribol, thank you very much. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Jai Srimad Bhagavad Gita Granth Raj ki jai.